On Christmas Eve, 1945, a house caught fire in a small town in West Virginia. The father escaped. The mother escaped. 4 of their 10 children escaped. The other 5, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty, were never seen again. No remains were found in the ashes. No bones, no teeth. Nothing that would prove 5 children had ever been inside that house. The official verdict: death by fire. The family's verdict: their children were taken. For the next 30 years, George and Jennie Sodder placed a billboard on the highway outside their home. A massive sign with photographs of their 5 missing children, and a single question directed at anyone who might know the truth. They never took it down. This is the story of the Sodder children, and it is one of the most disturbing unsolved cases in American history. The Sodder family lived in Fayetteville, West Virginia. George Sodder was an Italian immigrant who had built a successful trucking business. He and his wife Jennie had 10 children, a large, close family by all accounts. George was not a quiet man politically. In the months before the fire, he had been openly critical of Benito Mussolini and Italian fascism, opinions that had reportedly made him enemies in the local community. One man, a stranger who had come to the house seeking work, had reportedly told George that his house would go up in flames and his children would be destroyed. George dismissed it as a threat from a disgruntled stranger. He would spend the rest of his life wondering if he should have taken it more seriously. Christmas Eve, 1945. The Sodder family went to bed late. The children had been excited, restless. George fell asleep on the couch. Jennie went to bed. The younger children, Maurice 14, Martha 12, Louis 9, Jennie 8, and Betty 5, were still awake in their rooms. At around 1 in the morning, Jennie Sodder woke up to the smell of smoke. The house was on fire. What happened next is where the case becomes deeply strange. George Sodder woke, grabbed his wife and 4 older children, and got them outside. He then tried to re-enter the burning house to reach the 5 younger children. The fire was already too intense. He couldn't get back in. He tried to get a ladder from the side of the house to reach the upper windows. The ladder was gone. It had been moved from where he always kept it, and he couldn't find it in the dark and the chaos. He ran to his truck to drive it under the window and climb up. The truck wouldn't start. He tried a second truck. That one wouldn't start either. Both trucks had been working perfectly the day before. A neighbor called the fire department. The fire department did not arrive for several hours, despite the station being less than 2 miles away. By morning, the house was ash. And here is the detail that would haunt the Sodder family for decades. When investigators searched the debris, they found no human remains, no bones, no teeth. A human body, even a child's body, does not simply vanish in a house fire. Bones survive. Teeth survive. Even at crematorium temperatures, fragments remain. The ashes of the Sodder house contained nothing that proved 5 children had died there. The local coroner declared them dead anyway. The fire was ruled accidental, a faulty electrical connection. Case closed. George and Jennie Sodder refused to accept it. In the weeks after the fire, the Sodder family began finding things that didn't add up. A telephone operator told investigators that on the night of the fire, she had received a call from a woman who was laughing, watching the Sodder house burn from the road, and seemingly entertained by it. The woman's identity was never established. A local woman reported seeing a car driving away from the area during the fire, with children's faces pressed against the rear window. The insurance investigator who inspected the site found a liver in the ashes, intact, undamaged by fire. He concluded it was human. A second examination dismissed it as beef liver. No definitive answer was ever reached. The fire chief initially said the fire was too hot to leave remains, but this contradicted everything known about fire and bone. Investigators noted that the electrical wiring in the Sodder house had been inspected just days before the fire and found to be in good condition. The fuse box, which should have been triggered by an electrical fault, was found completely intact. George Sodder hired private investigators. He put up reward money. He placed advertisements in newspapers across the country. And in 1952, he built the billboard. A large sign on Route 16 outside Fayetteville. Photographs of all 5 missing children. The last known images of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty. The sign asked anyone with information to come forward. George and Jennie updated the photographs over the years, using age progression images to show what the children might look like as teenagers, as young adults. The billboard stood for decades. Passing drivers stopped. Reporters wrote stories. Tips came in from across the country. None of them led anywhere definitive, but some of them were deeply unsettling. Theory 1. The children died in the fire and the remains were destroyed. This is the official position. Some fire experts have argued that under certain conditions, particularly when a fire burns extremely hot and collapses onto itself, remains can be reduced beyond recognition. But critics of this theory point to the intact fuse box, the working condition of the wiring days before the fire, and the complete absence of any fragment, not just bones but teeth, which survive even the most intense fires. Forensic experts consulted by the family in later years consistently said the absence of any remains was highly unusual. Theory 2. The children were kidnapped, possibly by the mafia. George Sodder's outspoken criticism of Mussolini and Italian fascism had made him a target. Some researchers have suggested that organized crime figures with ties to Italian fascist sympathizers may have arranged both the fire and the disappearance as retaliation or as leverage. This theory gained traction in later years when the family received a photograph. In 1967, 22 years after the fire, Jennie Sodder received an anonymous letter in the mail. Inside was a photograph of a young man, perhaps in his late 20s. On the back was written, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, ill boys, a 90132. The photograph bore a resemblance to what Louis Sodder might have looked like as an adult. The family hired a private investigator and sent him to follow the lead. He traveled to the address suggested by the postmark. He was never heard from again. Theory 3. Local corruption covered up the truth. Several details of the official investigation have been criticized by researchers. The fire chief's contradictory statements, the coroner's decision to declare the children dead without any physical evidence, the fire department's delayed response. Some researchers believe that local officials, for reasons that have never been established, either made serious errors or actively suppressed evidence in the immediate aftermath of the fire. Theory 4. The children escaped and were hidden. A small number of researchers have proposed that the 5 children, the oldest of whom was 14, may have escaped the fire through a window or door, become disoriented, and been picked up by individuals who then concealed their identities, either through coercion or misunderstanding. This theory is the least supported by evidence, but it is also the one the Sodder parents themselves seem to believe most deeply, because it meant their children were alive. George Sodder died in 1969, still searching. Jennie Sodder lived until 1989. She never accepted the official verdict. In her final years, she kept the billboard standing, kept the photographs updated, kept waiting for a letter or a phone call or a knock on the door. The surviving Sodder children, now elderly, have continued pursuing answers. In 2008, the case was reinvestigated by a documentary team. Forensic analysis of the 1967 photograph suggested it could be consistent with an adult Louis Sodder, but no definitive identification was possible. The anonymous letter was never traced. The private investigator was never found. The fire site has been excavated multiple times over the decades. In 2021, 76 years after the fire, investigators conducted a new dig. They found fragments of vertebrae that may be human. DNA testing was inconclusive. 5 children, 1 night, 0 remains, 0 answers. The billboard came down after Jennie Sodder's death, but the question it asked for nearly 40 years still doesn't have an answer. What happened to the Sodder children? There are cases that go cold because the evidence runs out, and then there are cases like this one, where the evidence never really existed in the first place, where the official record has holes big enough to build a life's worth of doubt inside. George and Jennie Sodder built their entire lives around that doubt. They never moved, They stayed on the same land where the house once stood. They put a billboard on the highway and asked the world to help them find their children. Nobody ever did. What do you think happened that night in Fayetteville? Did the Sodder children die in the fire? Or did someone take them? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this is the kind of case that keeps you up at night, subscribe to the Vanished Archive. Every week we open another file that was never truly closed. The next case is already waiting.